YouTube, what is good? It's your man Ribs from Doing Film Things. Every single week I make a new video about film photography, so if that's your thing, definitely go ahead and subscribe. Last week was quite jam-packed between going to some protests and just kind of sticking to the news cycle and really following the stories developing in the US and in the UK. It was a lot, and I needed a bit of a quick break, so I decided to hop on an off-peak train and head out to Brighton to go to the beach and watch the sunset, take some photos, and just kind of disconnect from all of the stuff happening on social media and on the news and just around me. It ended up being a great evening. I took a train at about, let's say, 6:45 or something like that. It was basically empty. And when I got to Brighton, there were some people out, but it was mostly locals, nothing too crowded or anything like that. I decided it would be smart to bring with me a whole bunch of Fuji C200 and kind of put the film through its paces and see how it would perform in some of these mixed lighting conditions. So before we get into the very specific details, here's a bunch of footage and photos from that evening. Very nice day out. A lot of clouds out, which is really nice for photography. It kind of prevents the direct harsh sun from just getting all up in your photos. Provides some diffusion and also just gives you a lot of interesting stuff going on in the sky. So I'm hoping that when the sun gets even lower and some colors start to show up in the sky, that we're going to get some really texture. The boardwalk here is open. There's not a lot of people, but there's definitely people hanging out and walking around. But the big pier, which is kind of the main attraction here, is obviously closed. But I'm going to feature it in a lot of these photos. I think this is the signature thing that you have to see when you're out here. And I figure with the good lighting and clouds and stuff like that, it should be pretty nice. Very excited to see how this film performs in that kind of light. Once the sky turns a bit pink, purple, that kind of thing. A lot of films don't really know what to do with that, especially some of the cheaper films. So I'm hoping that this one can handle that. Hope you enjoyed the video and the footage. I very much enjoyed shooting the Fuji C200. First things first is the cost. I really appreciate how many shots you get for the cost of the film. In the US, this film is very, very cheap. I think I saw it on B&H for $3.99 per roll of 36. And in the UK, it's definitely a bit more expensive, as pretty much everything film photography is, but it's still on the lower end in terms of the cost of a roll of 36 exposures for color film. This film was very popular because of the fact that it's one of the cheapest consumer range films, and it performs well enough for the price. It's definitely worth saving a couple bucks by buying this cheaper film, even though you're not going to get the most professional output. In fact, this film is pretty much always sold out the moment it hits the stores. If you see it, you might as well jump on it really quickly because I guarantee you it will sell out very soon. The rolls that I shot today, I actually bought on eBay. All right, so let's talk specs. I think before we get into anything very, very particular, overall, I want to communicate to you that this film definitely delivers a look. It definitely has a very particular style of color and sharpness and kind of that whole package combined. And thus, this film is not one that you can kind of manipulate very much and expect to have complete control over like you would something a lot more expensive like Portra. Here, the film gives you a very specific look, and it's a classic look of this particular film stock. So first and foremost, let's talk about the color. So generally, this film is not very saturated. The colors definitely don't pop and kind of grasp you the way a lot of others films do. However, despite that bit of desaturation, you actually see quite a bit of contrast. There's a good amount of, I would say, micro contrast. Not so much in terms of like the highest highs and the lowest lows, but kind of in the middle, you definitely see a bit of additional contrast, which is definitely something you can appreciate. You know, again, it delivers a look right out of the box. Generally, colors do lean a bit to the colder side, which is not my personal preference, but that's totally fine. And I find that the color red kind of gets muted a bit. Instead of, you know, getting that really shiny, kind of bright in your face red that you would expect from certain things, here, the color red typically falls flat just a bit. Again, that's part of the look, but I don't really appreciate that part. On the whole, the look that you get in terms of contrast and saturation definitely is something to appreciate about the film. Even if it's not your particular style, it is nice that this film does have a specific look. In terms of grain and sharpness, this film definitely has a bit to offer. Even though it is a cheaper film, it actually does perform pretty well in terms of sharpness. I wasn't using the sharpest lenses, of course. I had some cheap lenses that I have on my Canon EOS 300V. And I also have a long telephoto L lens from the 90s, which is not very sharp, especially when you have it wide open. But nonetheless, I was pretty happy with how this film handled the detail. If you zoom in, you definitely start to see things break down just a hint, but not in a way that makes you think, wow, this film really doesn't capture detail at all. Even though this is a lower ISO film, you know, at ISO 200, there definitely still is some noticeable grain on this film. It does add a bit of character to the overall look, but I was surprised at how much there actually is, especially when you look at the brights in an image. If you zoom into some of my photos, especially in the sky area where you think you would have a lot of detail and it shouldn't be too much grain, you still see a very clear grain pattern, which, you know, that's part of the look, and it probably has to do with the fact that this is a cheaper budget film. Lastly, in terms of specifications, let's talk about dynamic range. Again, I don't have any of these specific kind of technical bits in terms of how many stops and that kind of thing. You can of course look that up, but I will say that I was fairly impressed with how this film handled highlights and shadows in an image. Of course, it's not perfect, especially when you compare it to some other films, but I find that if you meter for the mids or potentially the highs, you will get a very nice even exposure across your image. I did have the light changing a lot during the time that I was on the beach. You know, clouds were coming in and out, and therefore there was a lot of direct sunlight, but then sometimes diffused sunlight. And this film definitely delivered different images for each one of those looks. But nonetheless, I think each different type of image was fairly acceptable. And I have some very aggressive examples here where you can see the light was very, very bright from the sun, and you still managed to capture a bit of detail as well as some of the shadow detail. I do have a few images that are blown out, but I think that's because I overexpose as opposed to the film itself not being able to handle the highs. So generally, for the price, I think this film does pretty good when it comes to dynamic range. So how do I feel about this film generally? I will say I think this film has a lot of value in that it's got a great price and a great number of photos. That combination is very important with film because of the fact that you're paying for every single photo that you take. So money does matter, and therefore this is definitely something to consider when thinking about whether to purchase this film or not. In the end though, this film exists because of its value. I assume Fuji wasn't trying to hit it out of the park here with every single specification and with kind of refining a particular look. I think Fuji is trying to deliver something to you that's affordable and scalable. So especially for you people who are just starting out with film, this is a great way to get involved without spending all your money on Portra and on Ektachrome and on things that are a lot more expensive. I must say, I did have a good time printing an image from this particular C200 film roll. I actually printed an image before scanning anything, so it was interesting to look at the negatives and kind of use that to figure out what image I think I would like without seeing any version of it digitally. This right here is one of the prints that I made. It's from the Brighton Beach Pier, and this shot here was taken with one of my zoom lenses, the Canon 100-300. So I don't know how zoomed in I was, but I was pretty tight in on there, and I had to shoot fairly wide open, so it's not the most detailed shot in terms of sharpness or anything like that. It's fantastic to be able to work with your negatives in another way than just scanning them. Scanning them, of course, matters. That way you can share your images on the internet and that kind of thing, but printing them is just a whole nother experience, and it's a whole nother layer to throw into the film experience. So if you're considering investing in a home darkroom setup, I definitely think you should, and you can check this video above here to give you more information as to how I did mine. All right, y'all, I hope you found this video useful. I think there's a lot to say about this Fuji C200, and if you're considering buying some, I would say you should. If you like this video and you found it useful, please go ahead and leave me a like. I would really appreciate that. If you want to see more videos like this and learn about other film stocks, definitely go ahead and subscribe as well. At the end here, I'll leave a playlist of all of my film reviews. That way you can look at some other thoughts I have about other stocks. Until the next video, y'all, peace.